Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the Forrester mansion was heavy with tension that clung to the walls and crept into everyone's bones. Ridge Forrester stood in the vast living room, his broad shoulders bent, and his gaze concentrated on the exquisite carpeting at his feet. The news had hit him like a freight train, and the words, "He killed Paris," reverberated sharply and unrelentingly in his memory. Thomas, his son, the youngster he'd raised, the man he defended through every blunder, was now in the center of a maelstrom that threatened to split their family. It was not intended to be like this. The Forresters were no strangers to scandal. Decades of betrayals, adultery, and corporate conflict had conditioned them to accept the turmoil of their society. But this was different. This was murder. Paris Buckingham, bright and ambitious, with her quick smile and unwavering attitude, was vanished. And Thomas, Ridge's own flesh and blood, was charged. The doorbells ringing pierced the silence like a dagger. Ridge's head sprang up, his heart racing as he crossed the room to answer it. He recognized who it was before he answered the door. Chief Baker stood on the threshold, grim-faced, surrounded by two cops in spotless uniforms. The emblem on Baker's chest glinted in the light from the chandelier, a sharp reminder of his authority. "Ridge," Baker murmured, his voice low and forceful. "I need to talk with Thomas." "Where is he?" Ridge's throat clenched. He wanted to close the door, shielding his son from the world beyond, but he knew it was pointless. Whatever the truth was, it always managed to rise to the surface. "He's upstairs," Ridge said, standing aside to allow Baker and his guys in. The cops' boots echoed on the marble floor, each stride hammering Ridge's determination. Ridge's mind raced as he followed Baker up the stairs. Thomas had always been ardent, motivated by a need to prove himself and step out of his father's shadow. But murder? It did not make sense. Paris had been a friend, a colleague, and someone Thomas admired. Ridge replayed every contact he could recall between them, looking for a sign, a moment that could explain why things had gotten so out of hand. The door to Thomas's room was open, and Ridge noticed his son sitting on the side of the bed, his head in his hands. Thomas looked up as Baker entered, his eyes wide with dread and defiance. "Chief Baker," Thomas answered calmly, despite the tremble in his palms. "What is this about?" Baker did not waste time. "Thomas Forrester, you're under arrest for the murder of Paris Buckingham." The words hit like a bomb, and Ridge felt the ground shake beneath him. Thomas's cheeks paled, but he did not flinch or complain as the officers went forward to handcuff him. "Dad," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking as he stared at Ridge. "I did not do this. I swear." Ridge wished to believe him. Every fiber of his being demanded that he trust his son and fight for him. But the weight of Baker's charge, the steely conviction in the chief's gaze, sowed a seed of doubt that Ridge couldn't shake. He stood motionless as the officers carried Thomas away, the handcuffs gleaming like a cruel mockery of the life they'd all known. The days that followed were a jumble of anguish and despair. The Forrester family rallied, as they usually did, but the cracks in their oneness were too obvious to ignore. Brooke, Ridge's wife, was a rock of strength, but she couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. Thomas's sister, Steffi, was enraged, striking out at anyone who dared to insinuate her brother was guilty. And Eric, the patriarch, sat in his study, gazing at old family photos as if they could rewrite the current. The media descended like vultures, with headlines shouting, "Forrester heir accused of murder." The paparazzi congregated outside the estate, their cameras flashing at every window. The fashion industry, where Forrester creations reigned supreme, was rife with speculation. Paris had been more than just an employee. She was a rising star, her designs revitalizing the company. Her death left a gap, and the accusations against Thomas threatened to demolish everything the Forresters had accomplished. Ridge threw himself into finding the answers. He hired the best private investigator money could buy, a grizzled veteran named Malone who had a flair for uncovering secrets others wanted hidden. Malone's reports were detailed, but frustratingly inconclusive. Paris had been found in her apartment, with a single stab wound to her chest and no indications of resistance. The murder weapon, a knife from the Forrester Creations design lab, bore Thomas's fingerprints. It was damning, but Rich refused to accept it as the complete narrative. He paid a visit to Thomas in jail, the clinical gray walls of the visitation room standing in stark contrast to the richness of their normal lives. Thomas appeared smaller, his eyes empty, but he kept his head up. "I didn't kill her, Dad," he said, his voice becoming softer as if the weight of the accusation was gradually crushing him. "I was in the studio late that night, working on the new line. Paris was also there, but she left before me. I didn't see her after that." Rich leaned forward with his hands clasped tightly. "So, how did your fingerprints end up on the knife, Thomas? Help me comprehend." Thomas shook his head, exasperation etched onto his features. "I do not know. I use those tools all of the time. Anyone could have taken it from the studio. It was conceivable, but not sufficient." Rich left the jail with more questions than answers, his heart heavy with concern that his son was hiding something. He couldn't get Thomas's past out of his head, his obsession with hope, his reckless decisions, and the way he let his emotions spiral out of control. Has something snapped in him? Has Paris, with her sharp wit and unwavering ambition, pushed him too far? Brooke waited at the estate, her eyes searching for any signs of optimism in his expression. "What did he say?" she inquired, her tone light yet insistent. Ridge slid into a chair and rubbed his temples. "He maintains he is innocent." Brooke knelt alongside him and took his hands in hers. "We'll get through it, Ridge. We usually do. But we must discover the truth, whatever it may be." The truth, however, remained difficult. Malone found a lead. A security camera outside Paris' apartment building captured a figure leaving the area the night of the murder. The footage was shaky, and the individual was hidden in shadows, but it wasn't Thomas. Ridge's heart raced with the prospect of a breakthrough, but Malone warned him. "It's not enough to clear him," he remarked. "We need more." Ridge plunged himself into the investigation, sifting into Paris' life for any evidence that could lead to another suspect. She was well-liked, but not without enemies. Her quick ascension at Forrester Creations stirred feathers, especially among the elder designers who felt intimidated by her abilities. Then there was her personal life. Rumors of a hidden connection, whispered chats in the design studio, and a mysterious text message found on her phone. "Meet me tonight. We need to put an end to this." The message came from an unknown number and was untraceable, but it gnawed at Ridge. Who had Paris met? What did she want to end with? He presented the information with Baker, who listened skeptically but agreed to look into it. Ridge did not trust the police to delve deep enough, especially since they already had Thomas in their sights. As the trial arrived, the family prepared for the worst. Steffi took over at Forrester Creations, and her unwavering tenacity kept the company together even as the scandal threatened to devalue their shares. Hope, divided between her allegiance to Thomas and her own sadness over Paris's murder, withdrew, her silence a wound that went beyond words. Ridge felt the weight of it all, the divided family, the unrelenting media, and the uncertainty surrounding his son's future. The courtroom was a circus, packed with reporters and observers hoping to catch a glimpse of the fallen Forrester heir. Thomas sat at the defense table, face expressionless, but Ridge could sense anxiety in his eyes. The prosecution presented their case with harsh efficiency, citing the knife, fingerprints, and Thomas's presence at the studio that night. They portrayed him as a guy tormented by envy, driven to murder because Paris rejected him. Ridge's heart fell as the evidence piled up, each piece a brick in the wall that surrounded his son. But then the defense introduced a surprise witness, Paris' sister, Zoe Buckingham. Zoe's testimony was a shocker. She confessed that Paris had been connected with someone at Forrester Creations other than Thomas. She didn't have a name, but she'd read texts, overheard discussions, and sensed her sister's anxiety in the days before she died. The courtroom buzzed, and Ridge sensed a glimmer of hope. Could this be the break they need? The defense requested additional time to investigate, and the judge granted a continuance. Ridge and Malone doubled down, pursuing any lead, no matter how minor. They interviewed every Forrester Creations employee, combed through Paris phone records, and even tracked down the studio's knife supplier. Slowly, a picture emerged, a rival designer, jealous of Paris' success, with a history of unpredictable behavior and a desire to silence her. However, the truth came at a cost. The farther Ridge delved, the more he discovered about Paris' life, her secrets, and her vulnerabilities. She'd been under strain, caught in a web of ambition and deception, and her death was a tragedy that affected far more than the Forrester family. Ridge felt guilty for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting her, and for not being the parent Thomas needed. The trial resumed, and new evidence turned the tide. Under pressure, the rival designer admitted to a dispute with Paris, but denied murder. It was insufficient for a conviction, but it was enough to raise reasonable doubt. The jury pondered for 3 torturous days before reaching a verdict of not guilty. Thomas was free, but his victory was empty. The family gathered at the estate, their relief dampened by the aftermath of the tragedy. Thomas, quieter now, felt a weight of distrust that would never go away. Ridge hugged his son tightly, tears running down his cheeks, yet the joy of the occasion was laced with sadness. Paris was still gone, and the truth about her death was just out of grasp. Ridge vowed in the weeks that followed to honor Paris' memory. He established a scholarship in her name to ensure her legacy lives on through the next generation of designers. However, the mansion felt empty, the laughing quieter, and the family relationships were strained by the trauma. Ridge stood by the window, gazing out at the city, wondering if they would ever fully mend. For the time being, they would take one step at a time, weighed down by their loss and the tenuous prospect of redemption. The Forrester heritage, bruised but unbreakable, would continue. But Ridge understood in his heart that certain wounds never fully healed. When he answered the door, Deputy Chief Baker stood tall and gloomy, hat in hand, his presence filling the space like an omen. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers shuffled uneasily, their gazes downcast. Ridge's heart lurched, a surge of terror coursing through him. "Ridge," Baker said, his voice low but firm. "We should talk. It's about Thomas." Ridge froze. He had faced betrayal, deception, and heartache, but hearing his son's name mentioned in that tone sent shivers down his spine. "How about Thomas?" he asked, his throat tightening. Baker paused, as if looking for the gentlest way to shatter a man. But there was no gentler way. "He's been arrested. For the death of Paris Buckingham." The words shattered the silence between them. Ridge lurched backward, his chest heaving. "No," he muttered. "That's impossible. Paris no. Thomas would never." Baker's face was chiseled with grief and steel. "We've got evidence, Ridge." We didn't want to believe it either, but the investigation led straight to him. Ridge's legs threatened to buckle. Images flashed before his eyes. Paris' smile, laugh, generosity, and Thomas, standing by her with that unpredictable fire in his eyes. He remembered the times when he felt his son was mending, breaking free from the demons that hounded him. And now this. Ridge was stunned when Thomas came in the doorway, flanked by officers. His son's wrists were cold steel, and his face was pallid but determined. Ridge had a momentary notion that Thomas looked like a little child again, lost and terrified. "Dad," Thomas exclaimed, his voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." "I didn't mean." Ridge reached out reflexively, as if contact could end the nightmare. "No, Thomas. Tell me they are wrong. Tell me this is a mistake." Thomas's eyes glistened, filling with emotions that he struggled to fight back. "I didn't want her to die. I loved her. But things got out of control, and she was leaving Dad. She stated she could no longer trust me. I only wanted her to listen. I just wanted her to stay." The confession came out in chunks, jagged bits of a broken truth. Ridge stumbled under the weight of it, split between incredulity and agonizing grief. Baker's voice sliced through the scene. "Thomas Forrester, you have the right to remain silent." The words droned on, official and final, but Ridge heard nothing except the hollow scream of grief. Ridge stood motionless in the doorway, unable to breathe, as they dragged Thomas away. The world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the previous. The news of Paris' death swept around Los Angeles, leaving misery in its wake. Her family was devastated, her friends heartbroken, and the community reeling from the cruel murder. The corridors of Forrester Creations were eerily silent. The lively energy that previously surged through the design house had vanished, replaced by whispers, tears, and an unsaid question. How could this be? Ridge avoided mirrors. He couldn't take the image of a father who had failed his son, a guy who should have recognized the warning signs but chose to hope instead. He recalled every time Thomas had slipped, every time he had dismissed worries, persuading himself that his son was strong enough to face the darkness. Paris had left, and Thomas sat in a cell, awaiting trial for murder. Ridge paid him a visit once. The prison walls stood tall and harsh, the air inside dense with misery. When Thomas emerged behind the glass, Ridge felt as if his heart had been severed. "Dad," Thomas whispered softly while gripping the phone. "I can't stop thinking about her. I remember how she used to look at me before the incident. She was afraid of me, and I can't get that off my mind." Ridge gulped hard, his throat stinging. "Thomas, you are my son. I love you, but I'm not sure how we're going to recover from this." Thomas's eyes welled up with tears. "I don't deserve to be back. I damaged everything. I murdered the only person who ever believed in me, despite everything I had done. She gave me a chance, and I shattered her." Ridge pushed his fingers to the glass, hoping to cross the insurmountable gap. "You are not beyond redemption, Thomas. I'm not sure how, but we will find a way." "We have to," he replied, but Ridge felt the weight of hopelessness descend deeper. The funeral was a sea of blackness and despair. Paris' casket was adorned in white lilies, her beauty captured in the images that ringed the sanctuary. People talked of her generosity, her laughter, and her steadfast faith in love. And underneath every word was the same awful truth. Her light had been dimmed too soon. Zen stood at the casket, broken and hollow. He had loved Paris with unwavering devotion, even when her heart wandered. He was now mourning not only her death, but also the life they would never have together. His eyes met Ridge's across the room, brimming with rage and accusation. Ridge turned away, unable to face the storm he knew he deserved. Ridge lingered after the service, staring at the glossy wood casket. He mumbled an apology he knew Paris would never hear, a request for forgiveness that would never come. Weeks became months. The trial loomed, casting a lengthy shadow over each breath Ridge took. The evidence was damning: heated debates, desperate communications, and neighbors who overheard shouting the night Paris died. The prosecution portrayed Thomas as obsessed, unstable, and incapable of accepting rejection. Ridge sat through it all, each detail piercing his heart. He wanted to scream, defend his son, and explain that Thomas was not a monster. But as the truth came out, Ridge realized with bitter clarity how blind love had made him. When the verdict was eventually announced, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The words sounded like thunder. Ridge's vision clouded, his ears rang, and he felt the world collapsing on him. Thomas bent his head, tears streaming over his cheeks, and Ridge could only watch as the final glimmer of hope faded. Years later, Ridge awoke in the night, gasping from dreams of Paris's face and Thomas's screaming. He saw his kid as much as he could, but each visit cut him deeper. They discussed memories, regrets, and the weight they both held. But nothing could erase the reality. Paris was gone. Thomas was lost. Ridge was left to wander among the rubble of love and family, tormented by the words that started it all. He killed Paris. It was a sentence that changed their lives, a wound that would never heal. Ridge sometimes found himself murmuring into the silence of his empty home, unsure if he was speaking to Paris, Thomas, or the shadows of his own heart. "I apologize. I'm very sorry." But the quiet always responded coldly and unforgivingly, leaving him to bear the anguish alone.